that attitude has changed because now you have people in production who are like, please, I would like anything to be shot locally. Back in 2022, just a few months before I was appointed mayor of the city of Burbank, I went and got my official diagnosis for autism. Like, look, I may not be able to agree with somebody on an issue, but if we can laugh about it, at least we're being human about it, you know?
Hey, is Anthony, is that your real last name?
So, yes. When I was born, my middle name was my dad's middle name, but then I had jaundice. I had a really high level of jaundice, and so they put me in for a blood transfusion back in 1981. They do UV treatments now. But back then, this was pre-AIDS testing, and so my mother was super worried, and so she went to the chapel at the church, and she asked for guidance, and she had this vision of me changing my name, and I was born on St. Anthony's Day, so they changed my middle name to Anthony to protect me, and blah, blah, blah. And so she thinks it was divine intervention that I survived, and so she made this little like plaque for me in my room when I was growing up. And so my first name is Konstatine, and my middle name was Anthony, so she put it on the wall, Konstatine Anthony. And so then when I got older, nobody could pronounce my Greek last name, Ratelas. And so every time I'd go into casting rooms, they would mispronounce it, and then they would feel bad, and then they'd ask me to leave. I'm like, okay, you know what? This is just not. So I talked to my agent, and my agent's like, well, look, you know, some people just use their middle name as their last name. And I'm like, oh, wow, that would be so much easier because everyone knows how to spell Anthony. So I changed it as my stage name. Once I started making money, my agent was like, look, you're going to have a hard time cashing all these checks if it's not your legal name.
Got it.
So I changed my name legally. So now I'm Konstatine Anthony in the courts and in documents.
Are you first generation Greek or?
On my mother's side, yeah. So I was born here. My mother was born in Greece. My dad was born here. His mother was born in Greece.
Nice.
Gets even better. His dad was born here. His mother was born in Greece. So like we always like.
Have you ever gone back?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Really?
All the time. I took my wife there 2 years ago,
Nice.
2.5 years ago.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
You've been around the islands and.
Oh yeah, we did all. I used to go all the time as a kid. Growing up, we had, you know, I have family there, so we'd go back all the time.
Do you speak Greek?
Ligo, Siga. Yeah.
Is my big fat Greek wedding? Is that?
It is the most accurate film you'll ever see.
Really?
It is spot on.
Wow. What is the stuff they spray on everything?
The Windex.
Do they really do that? No.
Well, it's not necessarily Windex. Every family has a different thing. Like, so for my grandmother, it was Robitussin. She would give you Robitussin for everything. I have my cousins, their mom would use Vapor Rub on everything. So it's like, it's this thing where the Greek grandmas or the moms have this thing. Oh, this is the one thing that's going to work for everybody. So it's not necessarily Windex, but it's definitely something.
I thought that's just a funny reference, the Windex. I thought they're trying to make that comedic,
I mean, it was very funny, but it hit home because I'm like, oh my God. And she would just say, "Give me the Tussin, give me the Tussin."
Ours was Vicks Vapor Rub.
Vicks, there you go, yeah.
Put it on your chest and put it under your nose.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's a cure-all. No, but it's a very accurate movie.
How'd you get into acting?
Improv.
Oh.
Yeah. So I started doing improv comedy in high school, and just fell in love with it. I would watch that show. Whose Line Is It Anyway? The original British version. Yeah.
Why nerd though? Why improv nerd?
So that signifies that I'm a little too invested.
Okay.
When we think about nerds, it's people who are
Focused.
Yeah, they're very focused on it. Back in 2022, just a few months before I was appointed mayor of the city of Burbank, I went and got my official diagnosis for autism. So I knew I had the traits for many years, decades. But as an adult, it's really hard to get the diagnosis. So I never really tried for it. But after getting elected into office, I had a lot of people reach out to me and tell me about, the troubles of getting the diagnosis and how hard it is and how it's not recognized and how adults specifically have trouble. So I thought to myself, okay, you know what? If I'm actually going to talk about this stuff, if I'm actually going to try to help people navigate that system, let me see if I can get a diagnosis. So it took me a couple of years. It took me a few $1,000s. It was hard, but I went through it. I got my diagnosis in December of 2022. I became the first officially diagnosed mayor in the United States with autism,
Wow.
and that I believe tends to put me in a category of people who hyper focus and kind of nerd out on certain things.
Got it.
Is it a written? How do they test you? Is it a written test? Is it a?
It's two major parts. It's talking with a therapist about your own personal like struggles in daily life and all of that stuff. And then it's being analyzed by an independent analyst. They're usually a clinician or maybe another therapist separate from your therapist. And then they see you fresh and new and clear. They don't have any biases. And then they go through the rigorous testing. They do written testing and audible testing. So you get those two combinations. And then together, the two of them put together sort of a diagnosis, a collaborative diagnosis. And they say, oh, yeah, he meets all the things sociologically. He also meets all the things technically and, his needs and assessments and how his brain works and that kind of stuff. But, it's funny. We're talking about autism so much these days with, RFK Jr. and all of what causes it and where it comes from. There's still so many questions that we don't have answered. And for me, what I try to do is, offer a human face to the diagnosis. I say, look, I'm out here. I'm trying to do good work. I think, mildly successful in my career, but I also have a lot of struggles. I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, the offices here in Burbank, they have 5 elected council members, and I'm one of 5, and I will be the first to tell you that I use up so much of staff time because I have a very difficult, situation of understanding timing and logistics and where people are and what people are trying to communicate to me. But I'm very grateful because our staff there has made great accommodations for me. They understand me now. This is my second term now. And they're like, oh, okay, he needs a text ahead of time. Or if I want to go through a schedule with him, I have to call him. I can't just email. And they make those adjustments. And I think it's been really exciting to see how little tweaks here and there. And it's not a big changes, but it's allowed me to be more successful. And by proxy, if I'm more successful, then the city becomes more successful because now you've got 5 active council members all working together versus what I've seen in some other jurisdictions. There was a woman elected to school board in the Midwest. She was, from my research, the first openly autistic individual ever elected in the United States. And they refused to change any of the board meetings for her or how she gets her information and her packets and her emails. And she's like, look, I'm not asking for much. Can you just send it to me, in this text format, or can you give me a paper copy, or just call me ahead of time if you need me to come in for a meeting? And they were like, no, this is how we do it. And she ended up not running for re-election because she said the job was too hard.
Got it.
Not that any of her votes or any of her priorities were wrong. The community, overwhelmingly supported her. She won in a landslide. They just said, I'm sorry, we're not going to help you. And she's like, okay, I just can't do this job.
Do you have any family history of autism?
No diagnoses, but, my grandfather on my mom's side, she talks about him, and I grew up with him when I was a kid. She talks about his kind of idiosyncrasies and the way he would talk and the things he would say and do. And I'm like, okay, if I had to trace it back,
it would be him.
Yeah. So,
And is it difficult for you to navigate in life with that diagnosis?
I mean, yes, difficult, but I've had enough support And I think for me, educating myself on where my deficiencies are helps me sort of bridge that gap. It's like, okay, I know I'm going into a space. Here's what I'm going to need ahead of time. So let me prepare myself.
Prepared.
Let me tell everybody what's going on and blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean, when things come up, I don't have a hard time. Like I went to there was a big May Day march on May 1st this week. And, it's a huge international workers' day. Communities around the world do big protests, unions and workers show up and do big rallies. And I went down to, Olympic in LA, downtown LA, and, thousands and thousands of people showed up. But it was very loud and very ruckus, and they got a late start. So we ended up being sort of squished together for longer than I was expecting. Normally, if you're in those big marches and parades, people are walking, so they're spread out, right? But because we were so close in, everyone with the noisy, noisemakers and the music and the bullhorns, and people had whistles, and it was a lot. And so I felt myself getting to that point of like, okay, I don't know if I can handle this right now. And so I talked to the people I carpool with. I said, hey, look, if you guys want to stay, you can stay. I'm going to find my own way home. And I'm just being honest with you. I don't think I could take the noise and the cacophony right now. And they were like, you know what? We're okay. We've been here a while. I don't think we want to do the whole march. The lady I was with was like, I'm a little tired from last night. I did another thing. I can go home. Let's go. And so just being able to communicate that to people, I think is very helpful, as opposed to sometimes folks in the autistic community don't want to be seen as helpless or as victims. And so they keep it in, right? They don't want to talk about it. They say, oh, I can be strong. I can power through this. And it's like, you got to know your limitations.
Yeah.
You got to know who you are as a person.
That's a good point.
So,
and even if you're not autistic, you should still know your limitations.
that's for everybody. And a lot of people don't want to do that. Folks want to seem like they're not weak or that there's no failures or failings. And I'm like, you're human. You're going to have faults.
Of course.
How has improvisation helped you?
Oh, boy.
I mean, because that's a big open field.
Oh, yes. First off, improv has been really great for me and my disability. So I recommend to every parent that I meet who comes up to me and says, hey, I think my kid's on the spectrum, or my kid got a diagnosis. What do I do? I'm freaking out. I said, put him in an improv class. The basic workout of improv, where you're connecting with people and you're communicating with them and you're giving that back and forth, it teaches the skills that I feel are naturally deficient in the autistic community. We lack that natural ability to make eye contact or to communicate with emotion or have that, relational instinct of how people are feeling or what's going on. And so for me, to learn that stuff through a system of games and practice of those games and in a fun environment, it made it easy. My son also has the diagnosis, and they wanted to put him in all of these really structured and rigorous classes, and this is how you talk to a person, and this is how you say hello, and this is how you be polite. And I looked at those, and we did a bunch of them, and they worked to an extent. But in 6th grade, he took a drama class, and they played improv games. He loved it. And just like that ability to have fun while you're learning how to be just relational in your communication.
Opening the dam.
Yeah.
I think everybody's naturally deficient in all the things you mentioned. It's not only, for
Well,
people.
we all have to learn it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So I think it's great, that you take that route and you took that improv route and you are who you are today, mostly because of that route that you took.
Like my attitudes towards people and towards life and even towards politics, it really stems from that team building, that collaborative community, that trying to understand your partner kind of mentality. And I do it even when I'm not on the dais or not on stage. And when I'm at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody needs help. Oh, what do you need help with? I'm not just going to do what I think you need to do. I'll communicate and be like, oh, do you need help with groceries? What's happening?
How much do you bench?
How much? How much do I bench? That's an interesting question. Seems out of left field.
Well, we're doing improv.
Yeah, we are doing improv. I'm trying. So PR right now, I'm pushing 245.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's,
So tell us the story. Did you get motivated? Did somebody inspire you? Did you always want to get into politics?
Oh boy, I never wanted to get into
I
politics.
mean, how did it, from acting and improv?
So so this is a funny story. In 2012, 2013, I was really focusing on my comedy career. I was working as an actor. I was doing film and television. But I really wanted to focus on like the comedy aspect. I wanted to get more funnier roles and that kind of stuff. And so I took a class on how to do stand-up. And so I started doing stand-up. And one of the things the teacher was telling me was, look, if you're going to do stand-up, you're going to end up having like great one-liners or quick little sets in your jokes, right? You're not telling a 5-minute joke when you do a 5-minute set. It's a bunch of smaller jokes. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those social media platforms really lend themselves to those quick little snippets of funny bits. So while you're working on your set to do stand-up, put any of the good responses that you get, film yourself at the clubs and all that, get those little clips and put them on Facebook. Go to Twitter and write a joke and get on Instagram and post a funny meme. Start building your social media profile. So I was doing that 2013, 2014, 2015. And then in early 2016, I had built a big enough Facebook and Instagram and Twitter profile that I ended up getting poached by a presidential election team saying, hey, would you like to come and do some jokes and bits about our opponent, who is very easy to make fun of? So I ended up doing that. And
did you do political humor? Is that why they picked you?
A little bit, yeah. So I during 2015, right, during the race and early 2016, everyone was talking politics. And so naturally I started to, engage with that and making jokes. One of my favorite comedians of all time is Louis Black, who does a lot of political humor, but also just like observational humor about
Bill
humor.
Maher?
Bill Maher's very funny. Yes. I may not agree with him on everything, but boy, he can make me laugh. Even when I'm disagreeing with him, I'm like, oh, you're just too funny. And I think I appreciate that about him because I kind of try to use that in my politics now. It's like, look, I may not be able to agree with somebody on an issue, but if we can laugh about it, at least we're being human about it, So I ended up doing that and working on this presidential campaign about, what's happening in America.
Which
and
campaign? Which one was that?
So I was working for Hillary Clinton for America, and we were doing jokes about Donald Trump. None of us expected him to win. I mean, no, nobody in the country expected him to
He
win.
didn't expect to win.
He did. I would argue that that's very true. And so the day after he won, I realized that I was actually doing that. I said yes to that, not just for my own benefit. Because I thought, oh, this is going to elevate my profile, right? That's why I said yes. Oh, I'll be able to do stuff on a national stage and get more audience, right? Me is what I'm thinking about. But then if that was true, why wouldn't I do it for the other team? Why wouldn't I go to his side and make fun of Hillary Clinton, right? If both could elevate my profile, what's the purpose there? And so I did sort of a personal analysis and said, oh, I actually think that the stuff he's going to do, and this was all speculation, the stuff he's going to do in office is actually going to harm people in my community. And I didn't know if that was going to be true or not. Obviously, we'd never seen him in office. He'd never held elected office before, so we were speculating at that point. But I thought to myself, I said, look, if that's true, then I owe it to myself to try to do something beneficial for my community. And so the day after he won, I opened up my Google browser and I typed Burbank city elections. And wouldn't you know it, that week was the petition to run for city council. I was like, oh my God, this is
get
too perfect.
signatures and put
Get
your
all
name
the
on
signatures and all that stuff. It was too perfect. And I had no idea what city council even did. This was, November, December 2016. I had no idea what local government was. I didn't know what zoning laws were. I didn't know what, all this. So yeah, it was a whole thing. So I took a deep dive into local government. The petition period was about 30 days. So I spent the next few days just like reading everything I could on, local government. How do you build a community? How do you build affordable housing? How do you, zone communities in a way that is beneficial to the occupants and the businesses and all of that stuff? I read a bunch of books on it. One of the best books I ever read on local city government is called Happy City. If you've ever heard of it, it's a wonderful book, and it was written in 2012, 2013. And
this one?
That's the one. Happy City. Yeah, Charles Montgomery.
Yeah.
He basically dissects a bunch of metropolitan areas around the world that have a high happiness rating. Not crime, not wealth, none of that stuff. But he literally has a rubric that he uses, and it's used by a lot of other organizations to measure happiness in a city. And he looks at how the cities are built, the way they're designed, where you put housing, where you put businesses, where you put parks, schools, all of it. And he said there's a real, actual, measurable way to make communities safer, happier, more connected.
How happy are we in Burbank?
We're actually pretty good.
Yeah.
We're pretty good. We could be better. A lot of it is due to infrastructure. So using his rubric, using a lot of other metrics from other organizations that I've investigated, a very popular website is called Strong Towns. If you want to pull that up, Strong Towns does a really great analysis of current metropolitan cities in the United States and Canada and Mexico. One of the problems we have in Burbank is that we were built originally as a suburb, but now we have basically gotten so much metropolitan spill over from LA that we're still trying to struggle with the population, the traffic. How do we adapt our infrastructure to a sort of urban/suburban populace? Because we're slowly becoming less and less suburban. And that's just because of demographics. Like, people have kids, and so there's more people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's also, it seems like there's a spill from Glendale, a lot of Armenian coming to Burbank and North Hollywood.
Well, Glendale did the opposite of Burbank. They actually accepted
The metropolitan.
the metropolitan. They've built, if you look at the size of it land-wise, Glendale is only a few square miles bigger than Burbank, but they're double the population.
Their population is about 200 plus. Population here now is about 104, 5,000 people.
105, yep.
And we had a decline actually in the past several years.
Yeah.
Of people actually going to different cities. That can be, of course, due to many factors. High housing costs and expensive to live here and so on and so forth. But I would argue that I don't think we have too much traffic here in the city of Burbank, and I drive quite a bit here.
Well, I said there was a problem with traffic, not that there was too much traffic.
And
it's the way we move cars through. we have certain areas that are just speedways, and then other areas that are so narrow. And so how do you change mass transit, buses and subways and trains? How do you build homes closer to businesses so people can walk more often than drive? I mean, how many people in Burbank drive to the store to do all their grocery shopping?
Yeah, but where everybody drives to any store in any city almost, unless you live like, I don't know, in downtown LA or downtown Burbank, you can walk from your apartment. But if you live here, you know, like you said, the suburbs, you got to drive down the hill and go to Ralph's.
Exactly.
Yeah, so but you're not going to build a Ralph's, you know.
But you're not going to build a Ralph's.
Over there.
But one of my favorite shops, it's called Raffy's Market. It's on Glen Oaks in Tahunga.
Yeah, we go there all the time.
And I can walk there from my apartment.
Well, yeah, you're right.
And it's a tiny little market. And another very popular spot in Burbank, it's Handy Market on Magnolia.
They have great meats.
They have great meats. They do those the cookouts and
I'll tell
every
you
Saturday.
yeah.
I grew up in Glendale, but I will never go back to live there. It's too congested, too much traffic. I think it's already overpopulated, city of Glendale. I mean, it's a wonderful, beautiful city, don't get me wrong, but I love the city more right now.
Well, that's the counterpoint I was making was Glendale sort of just took the guardrails off and just built with no thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way to do it. I believe that there's a way to do it efficiently and safely. And, you know, one of the simplest things I can point out is why is it that in the middle of a residential neighborhood, you have these tiny little markets that aren't a giant Ralph's, that aren't a huge Smart and Final or whatever, and they're busy all the time and they're doing really well.
Like Rafi's Market.
Like Rafi's Market. If you live in a place that's just houses as far as the eye can see, your city and your city officials have chosen not to allow the zoning in one little part of the neighborhood to be changed into commercial so that they can sell stuff. I used to live in a suburb up in Northern California. I was born and raised in Castro Valley. But it was a huge tract home development, but they had the foresight to make sure that right near the middle of the square, they had just a couple of commercial properties, and they had this tiny little market there. And we would shop there all the time. And it's just that kind of forethought that you're like, okay, if I couldn't shop there, I would have to drive 30 minutes to get out of this big tract home and go to the big, you know, Lucky's or Albertsons or whatever they have in Northern California. And it would be detrimental to the folks who lived in that community. And so what I found out through this research, through this reading of the books, it's policy choices. There's no reason why we can't come in and say, okay, if something like Glendale is too overcrowded, how do you build a city where people don't have to jump on the street all day long? How do we have shops and a dentist and a chiropractor and a little nursery and a child care facility all within your neighborhood so that you're not driving all over town trying to get to everywhere? How do you sort of break that up?
Being business friendly, like you said.
Absolutely.
Policy. Speaking of policy, how does Burbank, doesn't have a homelessness crisis compared to, of course, city of LA, much larger city, much more people. But what are policies that Burbank is doing that possibly LA can, emulate and put in those same type of policies for LA not to have a homelessness crisis?
So
is it like grabbing them from Burbank and taking them over the border?
So I won't testify what happened before I was in office.
I'm okay. I'm okay with that. It's okay to let them take him to LA. But
so before I took office in 2020, there had been reports that what you described is exactly what we were doing with our homelessness issue. When I came into office, a lot of the conversation we were having was about how you handle the homeless crisis. Our numbers had been going up steadily every single year. And when I came in, my big policy shift was changing homelessness from an enforcement model to a housing issue. Instead of simply criminalizing people for being too broke to afford the apartments, which That's our fault for not building affordable housing, right? That's a policy issue. Let's go out and talk to folks about, well, what is your budget? Where is there affordable housing? How many units can we as a city build in the short term and in the long term to get people off the streets? In my first year in office, we had a reduction in our total homeless numbers. So what we're trying to do here in Burbank is show LA and the rest of California, because California is dealing with this up and down the state, that if you simply find the available beds, if you simply find the mental health and drug addiction therapies that are available, because they're out there. We've been paying for this for decades.
But it's not being utilized.
They're not being utilized. They're not being connected with services.
But is it due to policymakers not enforcing those policies that they created, or is it due to homeless people not agreeing to use those services?
It's neither of those things. What we've done for so long is build support systems and sort of safety nets for middle class and working class folks to not fall into poverty. That has basically been our model in this country for a very long time, and it's worked for a very long time. What we have now is too many people have fallen through the cracks, and now you've got this level of poverty that is higher than we've seen in 100 years. And we call it the second Gilded Age. You have to go back to the 1920s to see this level of income inequality. We don't have the infrastructure or the policies in place to lift people out of poverty. What we've done since basically World War II is simply put in a bunch of protections so people don't fall into poverty.
Give me an example. How do you do that here in Burbank?
So, for example, the easiest one I can show you is Social Security, right? Okay. We've built this big safety net for people as they age and they become senior citizens. At a certain point, they can retire, and depending on how much money they put in and the year they retire, they collect a benefit to get on Social Security. We have people now in this country who are unable to work because they've been doing backbreaking labor for whatever reason, and they're in medical debt for whatever reason, and they're younger than the age necessary for Social Security. So we have seen a larger and larger increase of older Americans who are not necessarily in that Social Security bracket fall into poverty. It used to be when you were very old and you couldn't work anymore, that's when it would happen. So what happens to those people who haven't hit the 65-year age, right? If you're 55, 57, 60 years old.
Even 30 years old, because there's a lot of young homeless people out there.
Yes,
right now.
yeah. Well, I'm using this as a specific example. I can get to that too. What happens when you fall off and you become impoverished and suddenly you're homeless? Well, you lose your address, right? So now you got to carry all your stuff with you, your ID, your driver's license, all that stuff, your paperwork. What happens if you get arrested for being homeless? What happens if you leave to go to the soup kitchen and you come back and all your stuff is gone? So many people lose their identity and their paperwork. Okay, now you become 65 and you're homeless. How do you get your benefits? The system was designed for middle-class people who are going broke in their homes and have their families and can then file. It's not designed for somebody living on the street who doesn't know where the nearest Social Security office is or can't get their mail from the federal government or from the county authorization office. So what we have been trying to do, and this is something I'm very proud of in Burbank, our outreach team, our street outreach team, they will help you with your paperwork. They will literally sit with you and go, what's your Social Security number? Let me look up your benefits and see if we can file for your paperwork to get you money, get you on disability, things that you've paid into, right, for the first 60 years of your life. And that has been a huge help for people.
But Social Security, when it was created, to me, was bullshit because the age limit to be able to collect it was so far beyond the average lifespan
Oh, yes.
of people paying in. So they never got to collect it. And now, because people are living longer, now they have a problem with it. On top of, LBJ taking out the surplus and putting it into the general fund because of the war, the Foolish War, which is a great thing on Netflix, Turning Point Vietnam War. Everybody should watch it. It's incredible. And so, how does this like I talk to veterans, and they're like, I used to live in Brentwood, where the VA is, and there was the street was full of tents. And I talked to people who were in charge of that. And they said, we can't get them off the street. They don't want to. We got the houses in here, but they don't want to come in. They want to stay on the street. Okay, so when does it? I mean, there's a law in the books that says you can't sleep on the sidewalk. So there's got to be some kind of middle ground where we can't just keep coddling behavior. We're talking about Burbank. Burbank, I don't see. I mean, once in a while you'll see a homeless person. It's clean. The streets are clean. The crime is low. This should be a model for other cities. But you got these, bleeding heart people who just want to cuddle, pick everybody up and give them a hug and say, "What do you need? What do you need?" And you come from Northern California. I drove up there every year. A couple of times I'll drive up there. There's all this land. Why don't we build facilities on this land with medical, with hotels, or not hotels, but apartments and all that stuff, and start fixing the problem rather than just throwing? It seems like we're throwing money. With Karen Bass, we're throwing money at this problem, and nothing's getting done. I live in Marina Del Rey. It's getting worse.
I was just up in Sacramento visiting the state capitol. I mean, it's the state capitol.
Oh, it's bad. Sacramento is probably one of the worst.
It's very bad. I was afraid to walk with my kids and my wife, and that we walked. I said, looks normal, looks clean. I didn't expect it to be that bad. Especially a lot of drug users, a lot of people with drug problems, mental health problems. Now, you're referring to normal homeless people. When I say normal, people who understand, hey, it can happen to anybody. Anybody in life can become broke, okay? But you have to accept the fact and accept help. But these people are not accepting it. People with drug problems, mental health problems.
I agree. I agree.
I don't need your housing. I don't need your assistance. I don't want to go and sit down for 30 minutes, find out what my social security number is and what kind of benefits I have. I rather go, under some bridge in some part of LA and do what I got to do.
I will tell you, at the very beginning of our conversation, I mentioned how the average American doesn't want to be seen as weak, doesn't want to be seen as accepting help. Yeah. This is true for people who are homeless, people who are addicted to drugs, people who have mental health issues. It's a very, I don't know what it is.
I think
but it's prevalent. It's a very prevalent problem.
How many medical marijuana stores are in Burbank?
None.
We have none.
Okay.
We do zero.
There is a solution right there.
What do you mean, absolution?
A solution, because I think drugs is a part of this. Drugs are
marijuana is not a gateway drug.
Not for some people, but that's a pastime. Like, I got nothing to do. Let me get high.
Sure.
And then what happens is it becomes a daily thing. And then before you know it,
if an individual has no direction in life, also if an individual is destitute, if they don't see any success coming, and this happens a lot for people who have been chronically homeless. If you're newly homeless, there's sort of this idea that it's only temporary, I'm going to get out of it. But what we call chronically homeless is someone who's been homeless for anywhere from more than 6 or 9 months. At a certain point, what happens to you as a person, you start to think that there is no way out. And you actually see folks increase drug use and fall prey to more mental illness the longer they're on the street. And so there's a concept called rapid rehousing, which is, to me, the best way to keep people from turning into chronic homeless. If you get people back off the streets into temporary shelters, or even staying with a friend or family member, or your church or your synagogue or your mosque, if they've got a collaborative network and you get people back off the streets, they're much more likely not to fall prey to mental illness or drug addiction or any of that other stuff.
How much of this is like, because the paperwork? How much of this is because people don't want to be sued? So you help somebody and some attorney comes.
No. Has nothing to do with that. Very little. A lot of these laws cover most of it. In fact, because it's such a big business, those companies have lobbied governments to remove the ability to actually sue people who are helping you on the street. The biggest problem and you talk to anybody who works in homelessness or benefits or even the VA stuff, the biggest hurdle is different jurisdictions and different housing or facilities or government entities putting restrictions on who can get the benefits. You mentioned the VA earlier. You can't drink alcohol if you live on the VA land. And I'm sorry, if you've ever met a veteran, you know, they drink.
They do everything.
And that's not a bad thing. I have a glass of wine when I'm feeling like a glass of wine. I'll take a shot of whiskey if I'm out with my friends. But you're telling me that if I'm homeless, I can't have any alcohol? It's like, dude, how am I going to survive the day? Like, it's tough. You put in the fact that many of our veterans have PTSD. Many of our veterans are dealing with chronic pain and injuries from things. And then you're telling them it's a clean and sober live. Like, all of these things that we put in as restrictions, things about, many of these facilities, nonprofits, moving away from the VA, going into places that are run by Christian missions. They do, especially the Catholic ones, they have restrictions on people who are LGBT. And so now you have individuals who, smaller percentage, who may be gay or lesbian or transgender and also homeless, being like, hey, can I stay with you? And they're like, sorry, we have a very strict tolerance on who we let in.
However, the LGBTQ community raises a lot of money.
They do raise a lot of money.
So they do have a place they can go.
Yes.
So there is and not only through donations do they raise a lot of money, the government gives them a lot of money.
Well,
right?
The government can't be discerning. It has to give equally.
Yeah. Well, you said, all that stuff about overseas and everything. So, I think there are a lot of organizations for LGBTQ. They raise so much money. I don't care. I don't care. Like, I will help everybody, but I think that if a community is raising money for, church is raising money for, and they have a Bible and they follow this book like it's the law.
Look, I'm not saying that they're doing. I'm not saying that they're going out of their way to be harmful.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I've spoken with the priests and the pastors of these places, and they say, I wish I, as the local affiliate here, could change the bylaws, but this comes from the diocese, and I can't do it, right? So they're more compassionate than people would lead you to believe. But as far as money goes, one of the wealthiest churches in the world is the Catholic Church, and they raise billions and billions of dollars. So comparatively, yes, there are programs, especially in California, especially in LA County, that can get funding to LGBTQ issues and homeless shelters. The problem is because there's so fewer of them, it's harder to get people to them. And the basics of what I'm trying to say is, if you have all of these restrictions in place, I'm not saying that people can't put in their restrictions because it is their private, nonprofit land. How do we as a society, and how do we as constituents of a government, tell our elected officials, tell the people in charge, hey, you need to adopt better policies so that if someone is being discriminated against in one situation, well, then we need to do the outreach to say, hey, you are welcome over here.
I think
But we don't have that in place.
I think whatever you guys are mentioning is true and correct, but at the end of the day, this is a bigger problem. It comes from bigger government. It comes from family. It comes from all these recent ways of new ideologies that are coming into people's minds. The new way of thinking. If you look back, 50, 60, 70 years ago, we didn't have this many homeless people.
Well, we also tax the rich at 90%. So
okay, yeah, but that was only for a short period of time.
It built the American middle class. So.
And we also had an industrial base, which
exactly.
we don't have right
so
now.
what I'm trying to, and they're slowly building that industrial base. That's the purpose that Trump is trying to put on all these tariffs so we can build those manufacturing jobs, those middle class jobs that you're mentioning, because the middle class slowly they have been evaporated.
I do want to point out that that's not what tariffs do.
Well, no,
I know that's what he's trying to do, but historically that's not how they work.
No, I know exactly what tariffs do. Of course they put on a tax, and that tax comes back to us. But his point being is trying to build our own manufacturing companies here to build jobs. And
I would encourage him, if he's listening, if anybody's listening, if anybody's got the ear, if they take those tariff dollars, the money that is being spent on those tariffs, and they actually invested in infrastructure to build the manufacturing jobs that we're asking for, I would encourage folks to look at how we subsidize beef and soy and all of the big agricultural industries in this country. And it has kept us thriving. We are a huge market. We feed the world.
Yes, we do.
And that's because we, as the federal government, as a country, say these things are important. We're going to build this stuff, and we have people working at good-paying jobs, union jobs, in a lot of those facilities.
How do you deal with, because you're going to, as a politician, I was listening to you, and I'm going to always play the devil's advocate here, okay? So how do you deal with PETA?
Well, I have a ongoing relationship with PETA and with folks who are in animal rights. I think there is a place for animal right protections. One of my favorite people in history who's still alive today.
Tell people what PETA is. That
So
they don't
PETA is, oh boy, I actually don't know what the acronym stands for anymore.
Ethical treatment of animals, but
People for the ethical treatment of animals. Yeah. That's right. And I campaign a lot on animal rights, and I've passed a few ordinances and worked on some bills on animal rights. One of my heroes is Temple Grandin, and she's autistic, and she worked in cow and dairy farms and beef. And one of her big pushes was people are gonna, the market requires people eating beef. That is a huge source of economic and just, health food, like, getting massive amounts of calories to people who are sick or starving or eating, especially when they're young. So she was very involved in the beef industry and the dairy industry. And her big push was, okay, if you're going to kill these animals, how do you do it in a humane way? Which I think is a conversation we should always be having, versus, well, hey, you got to stop this completely. And it's like, look, I understand, intellectually that more vegetables and actually a pure vegan diet, if you can do it correctly, is a healthy way of living. It's a clean way of living. But not everybody can do that. Not everybody has the economic ability or the time or even the health ability to eat that way. So we know that animals are always going to be part of our diet. We know that animals are always going to be part of our coexistence. Mm-hmm. So how do we coexist in a good way? And so
by eating animals.
Well, at a certain point, I've cut back a lot.
I know, but you still eat meat, right?
Rarely at this point.
You eat your steak rarely?
No.
I've actually cut out all red meat. I do mostly fish now. I do a pescatarian diet.
Now, how do you do that with all the mercury in the ocean? Like, I love fish too, but they recommend
only-
that you don't eat that much fish because it's high in mercury and it's really bad for you.
Farm salmon is like maybe one of the
Farm
worst.
is the
Farm
worst.
Yeah, it's like one
Yeah.
of the worst foods.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's why you go to I won't buy unless it's wild caught, and I think
They color the salmon. You know that, right?
yeah.
The farm salmon.
It's not naturally pink. I know.
I think we should teach people that they don't need to eat as much, right? So
Well, yes, there's
you don't need a big piece of fish so that you sit there and button your pants and go, oh,
Yeah.
you know. I think because the food industry has become such a corporation
Mm-hmm.
that, and I say this to my kids about. I remember when I was young, just brushing your teeth. As my dentist said, in the morning, that's it.
No,
Okay.
it's twice a day.
Now it's after
and
every
floss,
meal.
and you got to floss.
Yeah, so you gotta it's
And then the
products.
mouthwash.
Yeah, you're selling products, and it's actually detrimental to your teeth to brush that many times because you're wearing them down.
Well,
You know what I mean?
I'm not a dentist.
No, I know that. But
I-
I'm just saying. I think,
yeah.
like we're talking about food. I think factory farming is horrible. I think when you stick a bunch of chickens in a cage of 5 or 6 in the same cage and they can't move, that's cruelty.
Peter would agree with you.
But then again, I'm still gonna have my chicken.
Exactly. So yeah, where's the balance? That's what I'm saying. Where's that balance? I just personally, I have supplemented a lot of my calorie intake with pea protein shakes.
Is that due to like health reasons or
Well, health,
or you're trying to
diet, time,
help animals?
all of it together, I think, goes hand in hand. I have noticed a significant change in my wellness and my attitude, and I've been losing weight, and it feels good, and I've got energy, and I'm healthy.
Nice.
Yeah, so for me, supplementing with vegan protein shakes has been really great.
You like
But
asparagus?
I do like asparagus.
One
Yeah,
of the most densely vitamin enriched
Yeah.
vegetables.
it's nutrient packed. Absolutely. I've been on a squash trip.
Really?
Squash, just like zucchini and summer squash, high in protein, high in fat, low carb, and it's good fat.
Yeah.
So I've been loving it.
Quick question. How familiar are you with AB 379?
Oh, I was at a town hall last night.
Okay.
Nick Schultz, our assembly member here, was just doing a whole.
He's a former colleague.
Yes, so he and I were both elected to the Burbank City Council in 2020. We both served a full term, and then after he was rotated into being the mayor, he became our state assembly member, and so now he represents Burbank, like the north end of Glendale, Studio City, Valley Village, Sherman Oaks, at the Sacramento, and he passes state laws and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
A Democratic lawmaker from Sacramento introduced the bill.
Right. Yes. Very common.
Yeah.
Before, I want to ask you something because I noticed this a couple weeks ago. That apartment complex over there on the 5 in Burbank,
The one that's being built right now?
that's humongous.
Oh, it's huge. That's huge.
I mean, as far as we're talking traffic,
Mm-hmm.
how many units is that? That's going to bring a lot of traffic.
700, I want to say 761 or something like that. I
There'll be
think
a lot of people moving here.
a
Let's
lot
just
of
say
people.
that's at least 1,000 cars on the road.
And that was approved right before Nick and I got into office, and they rushed that through.
Lobbying
Very quickly.
developers.
Absolutely. Developers pushed that through because and they approved it literally between the election and when we took office. We get sworn in like a month and a half later. So they had about 6 weeks to they're getting into office. Let's get this done.
How many low-income units are in
Not
there?
that many. Not very, very. I think it's
They
something
need
like.
to have a threshold. Every city.
I think it's like maybe 10%.
10% or something.
Yeah.
So
to have low
70
income.
out of 700.
I've been pushing. We bumped it up to 15 once we got into office, but I've been pushing for 25 for a long
And
time.
that's still, they still have to pay rent, but it's at a lower
It's a
cost.
reduced rate. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
And
percentage.
who pays for the difference?
The government.
So the state of
No. The developer pays for the difference.
No, it goes through taxpayers, right?
No.
Where does the developer get the money from?
From the other tenants,
And they pay the low
they
income.
pay the difference. They pay the low
So
income.
that's why that's another reason why, like, I live in Marina Del Rey. Some of the apartments are like for a one bedroom is $3,500, $4,000 because They have low income to. I noticed that they also supply uh, detergent and dishwasher detergent and all these products for some of these tenants.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that before.
So, because I saw the guy with the box, I go, what? He goes, well, some of the. So that's all. So that's in the price of when they figure out the mortgage and everything.
And basically, what you do is you negotiate with the developer. They say, look, this area of land is only zoned for 500 units. And they go, well, look, if I'm going to spend the money to build for 500 units, it's not worth my time. I'm not going to make a profit, right? Because I can only build 500 units. And so you say, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll let you go to 750. You get more bang for your buck. Same footprint, right? Same land. You can go to 750, but 10% of the whole thing has to be low income. And so the developer, he calculates his numbers. He goes, okay, I'll make more money doing that. So here's your low income, and I get my bonus. And so it's called a density bonus. And a lot of jurisdictions were doing it piece by piece. That's why I said this one specific place got approved and developed separately. What we now see from the state in Sacramento is they have written out all these guidelines so that any jurisdiction can use the same formulas. And now you have more and more developers jumping at it and going, oh, I can do X number of units and provide that local jurisdiction with X number of affordable housing. Again, taxpayers don't pay for it. Government doesn't pay for it. It's subsidized by the developers' profits that they're making on all the other market rate housing.
In the infrastructure now, let's just say, like, you have a street of 20 houses with maybe 25 toilets, okay? So let's say they knock down 10 of those. They knock down 50% of those houses and put up 30 to 100 unit apartment complexes, which now have 400 to 600 toilets. Okay, how does the cities accommodate for that? Did they accommodate for that like in the past?
So what you'd seen historically are what's called development impact fees, which if you're going to build a single family home, you got to run a sewer to the main line, right? And so they assess, okay, how big is that sewer line? How much is it going to cost? And so if you want to build, you have to pay that fee ahead of time. What you've seen in the last 6-7 years with Sacramento giving all of these big bonuses for development and for density bonuses and bigger units, a lot of local jurisdictions, including Burbank, have increased their development impact fees, saying, okay, these were set at a time when we could mitigate the size of the house and where you're going to be putting it. Now, if Sacramento's coming in saying, okay, you can build huge high-rise, like 760 units, what can we do as a local jurisdiction? And so the state gave us a huge amount of leeway to say, okay, you can increase those fees to the maximum. And so now we get big investments from those developers to pay for sewer, to pay for new schools, to pay for police, fire.
Bigger sewer, like, do they rip the street up and make bigger sewer lines?
All of that.
Okay. Yeah. Do we have a shortage of housing here in Burbank?
So
is that why
if
we're allowing to build so much?
If you calculate how many people live here, how many units are available, and then you look at the number of people who influx into Burbank during the workday. So that is the simplest calculation. There's other stuff we can use about birth rates, buy and selling patterns, but the simplest calculus you can use is Burbank at night at 10 o'clock when people go to bed, 105,000 people. At 9 a.m. when the workday starts, like 200,000, sometimes 220, depending on the day of the week. That's double the amount of people. What does that mean in real terms on the ground? That means people are driving into Burbank at an extreme amount and working and then leaving.
But is that what the city wants? They want to increase housing so more people can move in here?
And
then wouldn't that?
So when we say the city, it's tough to say what the city wants. What I have seen is that the residents who show up for my events, the ones who put me into office, and right now I have broken the record twice now for most votes in city council history. People are very excited for the messaging that I'm giving. I go back to the books that I was talking about. How do you build a city that people are happy in?
Got it.
What the residents ask me is, I would like to live closer to my job. I would like to live in Burbank and I work here all day. Or I live here, my kid is graduating college, they have nowhere to move back to. They don't want to live with their parents, but they want to live back in their hometown. But there's nowhere for me to get them to, to live. And so we've done a bunch of investment in how to do that. One of the biggest answers that we got back was ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, something called a granny unit. People put housing above their garage or in their backyard.
Yeah.
That has been a huge boon in the city. People are actively building those, specifically for folks who have family, kids coming back from college, parents that they don't want to live on their own anymore, living in the back house. That has been a big bonus. The density bonuses that we're seeing, the state saying, hey, you can build higher. We in Burbank have accepted that that's happening. And so we've been proactive in building the guardrails around where they can build, how they can build. Because what we don't want to do is end up like Glendale that just said yes to everything. We're like, okay, how do you build a community and where do you build those densities?
Just make sure we're happy here.
That's my plan.
How did you guys lose NBC?
How did we lose NBC?
Yeah, because I mean, as a person who grew up back east, NBC Burbank, and now it's Universal City.
I think the biggest loss in Burbank, as with regards to NBC specifically, is when the Tonight Show moved to New York. And once it was no longer at the Johnny Carson space,
Who moved it there?
I think it was Conan, wasn't it? Conan O'Brien when he took it, and then they gave it to, then they switched it, gave it back to Leno, and then they moved it to Jimmy Fallon.
So Jimmy Fallon's in New York.
Jimmy Fallon's in New York. Yeah. Actually, I think Conan stayed here.
Yes, Conan went Universal.
Yeah. I think that was the problem. Another big issue that you see with these big media conglomerates, they're actually consolidating space. So NBC moved all of their campus onto the new buildings that they're building at Universal. Warner Brothers, for those of you who don't know Burbank too well, Warner Brothers has a big facility in Burbank, but for many years they had another facility up the street, separate, called the Warner Ranch. And it was a much more open space area for them to shoot and film and do that. They have now sold that property to an outside developer, and they're building new construction on Warner Brothers, the Frank Gehry buildings. There's two big pieces of construction. I think if you look for the photo of it, there's like a artist rendering. So they're building new facilities on their original plot, and they've let go of that Warner Ranch. Someone came in and they're now building sound stages, so they're going to keep it studio property, which I think is great because this is where film and television is made. But you're seeing these big conglomerates consolidate. The fact that Disney is purchasing Hulu, right? They did that merger, and even 20th Century Fox sold off a bunch of pieces, and all the other big conglomerates gobbled them up.
Yeah,
and
they're movie and TV, film and TV.
Yeah. So I think it's just a problem of consolidation. It's a problem of a lot of jobs in this country, regardless of the industry, are being gobbled up by big corporations, and we're not protecting small businesses. We're not protecting, the little guy anymore.
I asked you because you're an actor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an actor. SAG does nothing for actors except make sure they have a hot meal and if there's smoke, right?
Right.
And the industry, I moved out here to work in the film industry, and as not just as an actor, but I worked in every aspect. And it seems like they're losing a lot of the industry to other states, like Atlanta's big now.
Vegas.
They're saying Jersey's becoming big. And why can't
Montreal, New Zealand
get together and say, let's give these guys a break to get them back, and then baby step them back to paying a fair
because
share.
they're not pro-business. That's what we need our politicians to be pro-business.
Well, here's the problem. I think it's a different kind of pro-business. The bill that's coming through the state right now, and the Governor Newsom and all of the assembly members and state senators, they're all trying to push this big California tax credit bill. The biggest critique of that bill is that it's simply a tax break to corporations to do business here in California. That's the biggest critique I'm hearing. They're still working on it, so I'm hoping they listen to that critique, because historically, that's always been what's happened. We give a bunch of tax breaks to Warner Brothers and Disney and Nickelodeon and NBC Universal and say, please, please, please keep your business here. We'll give you a bunch of money. And the moment a production is done, or the moment the tax break runs out and they can get somewhere cheaper in South Korea or in Bangladesh, they'll move it. So how do we as local government, and this is what I've been working on, and in fact, the city of Burbank, we are creating a film and television task force and a film commission as well.
You guys don't have a film commission now?
We haven't never had a film commission.
That's crazy,
right?
Even where I'm from, Rhode Island has a film commission, the smallest state in the country.
Yeah, it's taken me quite a long time to get that done.
Did they take it for granted that we got the business, so we don't need it?
Not only that, they were, for many years before I got onto council, they were so privileged as to thinking we didn't need to do anything. In fact, there was an ordinance in the city that said you can't do filming in Burbank outside of the studios. When we know, historically, you go back 60s, 70s, 80s, you watch these movies, Back to the Future, it was shot on the Burger King in front of Burbank, right? They used to shoot on our streets. And for many years, all throughout the early 2000s, we said, no, you can't do that. When I got in office, I said, why are we?
Yeah, why? Why not?
Because it was like, that's not what we're about. We shoot professionally. I don't want to have to come home and see production on my street. I'm above it. And so that attitude has changed, because now you have people in production who are like, please, I would like anything to be shot locally. And so I think it came from a place of privilege, a place of, like you said, taking for granted. It's always going to be here. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, but if they voted against it, how is it going to be there? If they said, hey, we're not going to let you shoot on our streets, obviously they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to go inside studios, and then
right.
And the other local government.
I didn't say it was a smart decision.
Yeah. But overall, I think any business should be very pro-business friendly, because that's, the purpose of any city where people come and live. And like you said, Rafi's Market, local shop, big conglomerates, they're going to be around all the time.
So what I've been pushing for here at the local level is, how do we do tax credits for productions of $1 million and less, right? Good. How do you get, and those would include animation and video games and new media, music. That kind of thing is where you start to build up all these local businesses. You work in the industry, you know that the average person who's in this industry for a long time has maybe 1 or 2 major jobs through the year. They're regular or recurring or something. But then throughout the rest of the year, they find little jobs to keep food on the table. And this is true for crew, front of the camera, behind the camera. That's basically how it works. You may have 1 or 2 like stable jobs that you do throughout the year, but then the rest of the time you're like, I'm doing a pilot here, or I'm shooting a buddy's commercial here, or I'm working on this. All that little stuff is gone now. It's just gone. Now you just have, a couple of NCISs and some different 3-letter acronyms, whatever. That's all that's shooting on the sound stages anymore. And if you're not on that crew, if you're not working regular there,
you're not working.
You're not working. You're flying out to Atlanta for a 3-day thing, or you're driving out to Vegas to shoot a commercial for a single day. It's
how much of that do you think is these? Because I learned about how they pad budgets, and when I was working, I met with some people from Paramount and who did a big movie, and she told the people, she goes, I need $30 million for this budget. And they go, we're going to give you 60. And she goes, I don't need it. And they go, we need to pay some bills from the last projects. So, these people, lunatics, they want, you know what? Let's shoot in Atlanta. I feel like going to Atlanta. Let's keep this stuff local.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And what you end up with, and this is, when we talk about padding budgets, we talk about moving money around like that. That only works if you have this giant conglomerate. You can't do that on a small shoestring budget.
Yeah.
You just can't do it on independent film. The Oscar winner this year, Honora, fully independent film.
Yeah.
They didn't do through any studios, and they won the Oscar. What I tell people all the time is, yeah, you may be going to a different location and maybe saving 10, 15, 20% on your bottom line, but look at the quality of your product. You're churning out crap.
Yeah.
And that is the number one complaint of everybody who's consuming media these days. They're like, there's so much on and nothing's good. And
Yes.
if you look at the real, like, actual hardworking people who put together real stuff, it's typically stuff that happens in LA.
Yeah.
It's folks who have been doing this for a long time.
No good movie has been coming out.
There should be a study on the consuming of scrolling on Netflix and on Prime and on all these.
And what
because
do they click
you're
on?
looking at 15, 20 minutes, you're going, oh,
Yeah.
what
Right? Next.
I've seen this. Okay, I don't want to watch this a fifth time, because
Yeah.
this is the only good thing they have on right now.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a high rating on Rotten Tomatoes, I'm not even going to give it my time. I just won't anymore.
Quick question. What do you think of Newsom and his leadership?
I think he is in it for himself.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful.
I didn't know.
And you're a Democrat.
I didn't
Yes.
think that.
You know what? That's incredible. I commend you on being very truthful. You got my vote if I lived in Burbank.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's-
I will be very honest with you. If somebody is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I will criticize them. I don't care if it's a D or an R. If it's a Republican who's doing the right thing, I will go out and sing their praises. Case in point.
Good for you.
Case in point. Next door in Glendale, last year there was a big kerfuffle about the mayorship and who was going to become mayor. And Arne Najarian was up. It was his turn. We were talking earlier about how Burbank rotates their mayorship. Glendale does the same way. And family members and community members came out and said, hey, he said some pretty nasty stuff last year during the election and leading up to the election. We don't think he's a right fit. He shouldn't represent us, blah, 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 all of that stuff. And at the time, the city council agreed and said, no, we're going to skip over you this year. I'm sorry. And they put in Ellen, and she's been doing a great job. I don't have any problems with Ellen. I think she's fine. And my issue is that what does that skip lead to? Does it give Ara the ability to reflect and see what he was doing and what he was saying and why people wouldn't support him? Or is it punishment just for punishment's sake?
I think it might set a precedent, which I don't think should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you guys rotating, I think you should maybe possibly rotate in turns like they did all this time.
Yep.
Even though he's mayor now, right?
Right.
He,
And that's what I was getting back to. So Ara is a Republican. He's registered Republican, and that's fine. Local city government, we don't really look at DNR too much. But he went through a whole process, self-reflection and understanding in the community. He even filed a lawsuit to try to overturn the mayorship. And I think he did the right thing by reaching out to the community, talking to his council members, and in the most recent changeover, he was appointed mayor because he took the steps necessary to say, okay, I understand now why the community came out and said I shouldn't be mayor. I'm going to do better this time. And I will tell you, since he got appointed, he has been doing a phenomenal job. And I'll sing his praises.
He's been there for a while, yeah.
He's been there for a while,
He's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
Your former colleague and your friend Nick Schultz.
Nick's Bill 379.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Yes.
I mean, you said you were at a town hall. What do you think about that? I mean, we did a video yesterday on that bill.
Okay.
And I don't think it's whatever he's doing, blocking the bill in the committee. And
So here's what I understand about the bill. It was not his bill to start with.
yes,
A different Democrat up in Sacramento, who actually lives in Sacramento, introduced the bill, and there were three components to the bill. One component was they're going to increase the fines to people who are caught, paying for prostitution and all of that to $1,000. So now there's a big fine involved. Rather, before it was just a misdemeanor or felony, depending on what you were doing. Second, that fine is going to go into a pot of money that money is going to be used specifically to target anti-trafficking and go after people who are trafficking minors and putting them into that kind of service. So those were two components. The third component was to say that 16 and 17-year-olds have a higher penalty for the prostitution aspect up to a felony. Now, 15 and under were already covered under another bill, but at the same time, my understanding is that the 16 and 17-year-old interaction by anybody, regardless of prostitution, is already a felony. So that's under like pedophilia laws and whatnot. So that already exists. And so the problem that Nick had, he's the chair of the Public Safety Commission, and he's a deputy attorney general by trade. He used to work in the attorney general's office. He's prosecuted sex crimes and human trafficking.
So is the legislator who introduced the bill, she's also used to work?
Yes, she was at the attorney general's office as well. So she put these three things forward, and Nick, as the chair, says, hey, I'm getting a lot of feedback from victims' rights advocates, from people who work in human trafficking, and they're saying the language on this third part, the thing about the 16 and 17-year-olds, what it's end up going to happening is that they're saying the way it's written can be weaponized against the prostitute, and therefore putting her in jail. Also, any consensual relationships that person may have with anybody could also be weaponized. So what he said was, we have to change the language here to make it stronger. So I'm going to have to send it back to committee and work that out and then get it passed. And then what the original introducer of the bill said was, if you do that, it's going to have to wait a year until next session to come back. And he said, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to make it a 2-year bill? Or do you want to remove that component and we can pass that next year and we'll move the next two forward?
But if they remove that component, that means whoever solicits 16 and 17-year-olds, they won't be penalized with any type of felony, right?
Not under that bill. You already have the anti-pedophilia laws, though, so they'll already get a felony for that. What the language for that bill is specifically to prostitution. So we're talking about two different things. People who are just trying to get sex from somebody without money, people who are trying to get sex from somebody with money. So she was only concerned with the money part, because that is where you find that human trafficking. The other thing about trying to get sex from somebody underage, that is a huge...
It's a big no-no.
Yeah, that's a big no-no. That is already a steep felony and penalties there.
What was he blocking? I don't get it in the committee for him to...
So he didn't block anything. What he offered her was, you can either take all three parts of the bill, and if you do that, the third part is going to go back to committee and come back next year and get passed, or you pass the two parts of the bill, we can get that through this year, and then we bring the third part back next year. What do you want to do? And she said, okay, pull that third part out. I'll move the other two forward.
Can you pull the bill up for me real quick?
Yeah. And so that was the issue at play, and it suddenly turned into this conversation about Nick Schultz blocking the bill, which there's a very specific way that chairs of assembly of committees, what they do, they call it's either shelving or holding the bill, a common phrase. Basically, what you do is you take the bill and you put it in the non-active file. That is blocking the bill. He didn't do that. The bill actually moved forward with the other two components and got passed.
To take that component out as well.
Well, he didn't want to take the component out. What he was saying is, if that third component goes in, it may not get passed because the language is not written in a way that is comprehensive or cohesive enough. And he's saying, he told her, he said, look, all of these victim rights advocates are telling me that they won't support this bill unless the language is changed on the third one. So he was worried it wouldn't get passed at all. So what he was trying to do was help her get it passed. So it was this weird conversation of, okay, how do we change it so that it guarantees passage on the floor? Do we go to 2 years, or do we just move this portion forward? So yeah, it was tough.
Okay.
Well, here's the thing. What I now understand is this week, what he did was he ended up becoming the primary author of the bill.
Yeah, they took that part out. Whatever that controversial part that they were mentioning, that if you solicit for prostitution for 16 and 17-year-olds, you're not going to get penalized with the felony.
Not under that statute. There's
Yeah.
other statutes that you can get penalized for.
Yes.
Yeah.
So explain to me, if you're going to get penalized under a different statute, the pedophilia laws you're talking about,
Yeah.
you're not going to get penalized under this statute, this assembly bill?
No, because that language isn't in there yet. And so my understanding is this week, what he did, because this is one thing that you can do as an assembly member, you can take ownership of the bill. So it's now his bill, and he's working through that language to make sure that it gets passed and does include all of the changes that we want to see. So that's my understanding of what's happening.
Hold on. Tom, can you pull up? It says, under existing law, a person who solicits or who agrees to engage in or who engages in any act of prostitution is guilty of disorderly conduct, misdemeanor. Under existing law, if the person solicited was under 16 years of age, if the person solicited was under the age of 18 at the time of the offense, the person solicited was a victim of human trafficking. The offense is punishable as a misdemeanor by imprisonment in the county jail for more than 1 year and a fine not to exceed $10,000, or as a felony by imprisonment in the county jail for 16 months or 2 to 3 years. This is the existing law, right?
That's existing law.
Okay, now can you pull up AB 379? What is AB 379 changing?
So you have it here. It says this bill would require. So if you start from
This
the
bill
second,
would require a person who commits prostitution with the intent to receive compensation, money, or anything of value from another person to, for a first or second violation of those provisions, be offered a diversion program pursuant to specified provisions. The bill would make it a misdemeanor for any person to loiter in any public place with the intent to purchase commercial sex as specified. The bill would make any person who violates that crime or who commits prostitution in exchange for providing compensation, money, or anything of value.
so basically what you're doing in here, so it's worded sort of backwards. The end part there where it says $1,000, they're creating that $1,000 fine, okay? And with that $1,000 fine, they can now get you for loitering.
Yeah.
So like if you're out there looking for people, they can get you with this loitering fine. Typically a loitering fine is only a couple $100, but now they can get you $1,000 and at the same time force you into a diversion program, which is basically teaching people why prostitution is bad, why sex trafficking is bad, rather than just paying the fine and getting out of it. So you get a bunch of components with that $1,000 fine. And then if you keep reading down, it says the Victim Compensation Board and the Survivor Support Fund, that's that new program that's going to be funded by that $1,000. So you've created...
So what you're saying, it's still going to be a felony if you solicit for sex for 16 and 17-year-olds?
Yes.
Anybody under the age of 18?
Anybody under the age of 18.
And you go to jail for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So that the problem that people were having was that the wording of the bill looked like it was not going to be a felony.
Yeah, because
at all.
When I read the bill, that's kind of what it said.
But that's only under that human trafficking statute. It's still, we have a whole host of child protection and anti-pedophilia laws. Those can all be, and one of the things I mentioned about the $1,000 in the diversion program, that's in there because typically these individuals were getting arrested before anything would happen, so you couldn't charge them under the higher laws. If you get caught doing that, you go right to jail.
Yeah.
But this is now a preventative program where, okay, we catch you out there, you're asking for it, you're looking for it, you haven't actually done anything, how do we charge you? Okay, now we've got loitering. Now we've got the $1,000 fine. Okay, your first program, first time you've done it, you're just trying it out. Great, we'll put you in a diversion program. Now you got to go learn about what these girls go through and figure all that out. Maybe you'll never go out there again. You go out there again, okay, now we're going to increase the fines and we're going to get you. So it's twofold. We already had stuff on the books. It wasn't being activated or used properly because we would arrest them because we don't want them to end up there. But how do we deal with folks who've been arrested who haven't gone to the full, extent?
Do you think California's too much to the left?
No, I don't think so. We actually, and this is an interesting conversation we had last night at that town hall, with regards to human trafficking, we actually have arguably the strongest and most robust protections for human trafficking and the biggest prosecutions. And yet at the same time, we are one of the top destinations for human traffickers.
I wasn't referring specifically to these types of crimes or these types of policies. In general, with everything, you think California is a little bit too much?
No, we're still far behind, like Oregon and Washington. Even Minnesota is much more progressive than we are, especially with, you talk about labor rights and workers' rights and housing and homelessness. There are a lot of states that do better than we do on these kinds of things. And so, one of the major problems I always have with people who complain about California is they say, oh, we're too far left. And I'm telling them, I'm like, okay, we have some of the biggest corporations. We have some of the worst homelessness. We have some of the biggest income inequalities between rich and poor. We have more billionaires living in California telling us what to do with our politics, running for office. So no, I don't think there's a problem with the left in California. I think there's a problem of perception. I think people who are progressive-minded, people who are, pro small business and pro worker and pro animal rights and pro children's rights and all of that stuff, they think California is more progressive than it actually is. And they get into this idea that, oh, no, I'll just support Governor Newsom because he's our Democrat and he's left. I'm like, I hate to break it to you, honey, but he has voted against a lot of progress for many years. There was a huge bill during the entertainment strike. We were on strike for 191 days in 2023. Production shut down to a halt. Most of LA economy was ground to a standstill. Burbank took a huge economic hit. The Teamsters, these are like big working class union folks. They put a bill on his desk and said, look, we want this bill to get passed so that unemployment benefits, workers' compensation, the way companies handle folks who are on strike or out of work or on maternity leave, they need to be protected. And he vetoed it. He vetoed it in the middle of the strike. And everyone was like, what are you doing? If anyone was going to sign it, it'd be here and now. And this guy's like, eh. And so it's...
What was the reasoning behind it?
He said we didn't have the budget to take care of unemployed people, which is a misnomer because that's not what the bill does. It was to protect people who had been forced out of employment. It was a bill to protect people who were trying to get back to work. It wasn't a bill about people who refused to work or even were sick or disabled and couldn't work. It was about folks who were actively working and then had to be forced to leave the job. And so his reasoning, I don't know. He's just, he's friends with too many billionaires, I think.
Well, thank you, brother. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think we'll do this again.
Yeah, I'm around.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.